Riot cops tossed a 75-year-old black army hero at a peaceful protest. They dismissed him as just an old man, unaware his powerful former protégé, now the VA secretary, and an Ex-4 star general, was about to descend. The midday sun beat down on City Hall Plaza, reflecting harshly off the riot shields of the assembled police. 75-year-old Command Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne, U.S. Army, retired, stood resolute, leaning lightly on his four-wheeled walker, a small American flag attached to its frame fluttering in the slight breeze. His dark, weathered face, etched with the lines of a life lived with honor and hardship, was set in a look of quiet determination. He wore a simple windbreaker with a VFW patch sewn onto the breast, and pinned just below it, a small, unassuming replica of the Distinguished Service Cross he'd earned in the IA Drang Valley half a century ago. He was a legend in certain circles, a man who had faced down death countless times, but today, he was just another elderly black citizen exercising his right to protest proposed cuts to veterans' healthcare. The protest was small, mostly seniors and a few younger veteran advocates, their handmade signs reading, "Honor your oaths, vets betrayed," and "Healthcare not warfare." Their chants were more murmurs than shouts. Yet, the city had responded with an intimidating show of force, dozens of officers in full riot gear, batons readily visible, visors down, forming an impassable line. Captain Miller, the police commander on site, a man known for his aggressive dispersal tactics and a short fuse, surveyed the small gathering with unconcealed disdain. "This is an unlawful assembly." Miller's voice boomed through a bullhorn, amplified and distorted, though the protesters had a permit and were well within their rights on public property. "You have been warned to disperse. If you do not leave this area immediately, you will be subject to arrest and the use of necessary force." CSM Thorne didn't flinch. He wasn't chanting or shouting, just standing his ground, his presence a silent rebuke to the intimidation. He'd faced down enemy machine gun nests with more composure than these posturing officers displayed. Other veterans around him, some frail, some in wheelchairs, looked nervously at the police line but held their positions. They had come to make a point, to demand the dignity they had earned. "This is your final warning." Captain Miller bellowed again, his face reddening under his helmet. "Disperse now." He gave a sharp, almost eager nod to his officers. Several advanced, batons held ready. Panic rippled through the older protesters. Some began to shuffle back, fear in their eyes. But CSM Thorne, along with a handful of others, stood firm, bewildered by the sudden, unprovoked escalation. Officer Peterson, young, an adrenaline-fueled nervousness in his eyes, seemed to single out Thorne. Perhaps it was the walker that made Thorne seem like an easy symbol to break, or the small flag he held, an ironic target for the force about to be deployed. "You, old man. I told you to move." Peterson shouted, his voice cracking, though Thorne hadn't budged an inch, merely continuing to stand with quiet defiance. Thorne opened his mouth to speak, to assert his right, to perhaps remind the young officer of the oaths they both, in different capacities, had taken. But his words were swallowed by the rising clamor. Peterson, interpreting Thorne's steadfastness as defiance, unholstered his taser. "I said move." Peterson screamed, his face a mask of aggression and something akin to fear. Before anyone could react, before the other protesters could form a protective barrier, Peterson fired. The taser barb struck CSM Thorne in the chest. 75 years of resilience, of combat valor, of quiet dignity, crumpled as the electricity ripped through his aged frame. He cried out, a sharp, pained gasp, and collapsed heavily onto the hard concrete. His walker clattered beside him, the small flag falling from his grasp. His VFW cap skittered away, revealing his thin, white hair. The Distinguished Service Cross replica glinted under the harsh sun, a stark testament to a lifetime of service now met with brutal contempt on the streets of the country he'd bled for. A wave of horrified shouts erupted from the remaining protesters. "He's 75. He's a hero. You monsters," a woman screamed, tears streaming down her face as she and others rushed to shield CSM Thorne's fallen form from further aggression. Captain Miller, seeing the old man down and the crowd's furious reaction, hesitated for a crucial second, a flicker of unease crossing his hardened features. The optics were terrible. But the damage was done. Officer Peterson stood frozen, taser still extended, his face paling as the reality of his action began to sink in. He'd just tossed a decorated, elderly black veteran at a peaceful demonstration. Amidst the chaos, protesters shouting, some attempting to render aid to Thorne, others angrily confronting the police line which had tensed further, one woman moved with swift, focused precision. Colonel Aaliyah Washington, retired, U.S. Army JAGC, was in her late 50s, a formidable veterans' rights advocate who knew Thorne from years of mutual respect and shared battles for veteran welfare. She wasn't fumbling for 911, others were already doing that. Her fingers, steady and practiced, dialed a number not listed in any public directory, a direct, secure line. The call connected almost instantly. Vance, a crisp, authoritative female voice answered on the first ring. Madam Secretary, Colonel Washington said, her voice low but urgent, cutting through the surrounding noise. Aaliyah Washington. We have an emergency. Command Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne has just been tossed by local PD at a peaceful veterans benefits protest. City Hall Plaza, New Liberty. He's down. Paramedics en route, but the police action was egregious. She relayed the core facts: Thorne's age, his status as a decorated combat hero, the peaceful nature of the protest, the unprovoked police escalation. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Secretary of Veterans Affairs, Eleanor Vance, a recently appointed, highly respected former four-star Army general, knew CSM Thorne well. He had been her first command sergeant major when she was a young battalion commander, a rock of wisdom, integrity, and unwavering support. A mentor. A legend. The thought of him being treated this way sent a surge of cold fury through her. Understood, Aaliyah, Secretary Vance said, her voice now dangerously calm. Keep him safe. I'm en route. ETA less than 10 minutes. Control the situation on your end as best you can until my people arrive. No further escalation from PD if you can help it. The line clicked dead. Less than 8 minutes later, as paramedics were carefully assessing a groggy but conscious CSM Thorne, and Captain Miller was ineffectually trying to reassert control over his increasingly agitated officers and the incensed protesters, a new sound sliced through the cacophony. The low, powerful thrum of multiple heavy engines and the almost silent whoosh of high-performance tires. Heads turned. The riot police looked up, confused. Ignoring the flimsy police tape and makeshift barricades, a convoy of 5 imposing, blacked-out SUVs, government plates discreetly visible, swept around the corner with military precision, their tinted windows reflecting the chaotic scene with an unnerving impassivity. They didn't slow for the police line, they moved through it as if it were an irrelevant obstruction. The lead SUV, a reinforced Suburban, pulled to a smooth halt directly beside the area where Thorne lay. Before it had even fully stopped, doors opened and 4 men in dark, impeccably tailored suits and subtle earpieces emerged. They moved with a fluid, coordinated grace that spoke of elite training and absolute confidence. They didn't draw weapons, but their very presence, their calm, watchful intensity and the way they scanned the crowd and the police line, shifted the plaza's power dynamic instantly. They fanned out, not aggressively, but purposefully, creating an unobtrusive but firm perimeter around Thorne and the attending paramedics. Captain Miller, his face flushed with anger and bewilderment at this sudden, high-level intrusion, strode forward. "Who the hell are you people?" he demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of bravado and unease. "This is a secured police scene. You are interfering with a law enforcement operation." One of the suited men, clearly the team leader, older, with eyes that had seen everything and forgotten nothing, turned slowly to face Miller. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his jacket, produced a slim leather credential case, and flipped it open. The badge and ID card inside were unmistakable, radiating an authority that made Captain Miller stop dead in his tracks, his bluster deflating like a punctured tire. Special Agent Coulson, U.S. Secret Service, Dignitary Protection Division, the agent stated, his voice cool and level. We're also liaising with the Department of Veterans Affairs Executive Protection Detail. We're here on the express orders of Secretary Vance. Our primary concern is the security and well-being of Command Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne. Miller stared, speechless. Secret Service? For this old protester. The name, Secretary Vance, registered with a sickening lurch. This was spiraling out of his control, far beyond a simple dispersal of a local nuisance. As Captain Miller struggled to process the words, Secret Service, and Secretary Vance, the rear door of the central black SUV opened with a quiet, hydraulic hiss. Another figure emerged, stepping out with an air of absolute, unshakable authority that instantly commanded the attention of everyone present, including the now very nervous riot police. It was Secretary of Veterans Affairs Eleanor Vance. In her late 50s, a black woman of striking presence, she wore a perfectly tailored dark pantsuit that spoke of power and professionalism, but beneath it was the unmistakable bearing of the four-star Army general she had been until her recent cabinet appointment. Her face, usually composed and thoughtful, was now a mask of cold, controlled fury. She had been in New Liberty for a Veterans Healthcare Conference when Colonel Washington's urgent call had been patched through by her D.C. office. Learning that Marcus Thorne, her CSM Thorne, the man who had been a bedrock of wisdom and integrity during her formative years as a commander, had been tossed by local police while peacefully protesting, had ignited a righteous anger she hadn't felt since her days in combat command. She strode directly towards where CSM Thorne was being carefully lifted onto a stretcher by paramedics, her Secret Service detail parting silently to allow her passage. She ignored Captain Miller, who looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. She ignored the other officers, who now stood frozen, their riot gear suddenly feeling heavy and ridiculous. Command Sergeant Major Thorne, Secretary Vance said, her voice, though low, cutting through the remaining chaos. She knelt beside the stretcher, her gaze, sharp and full of concern, meeting his. She gently took his frail, trembling hand in hers. Marcus, it's Eleanor. Eleanor Vance. I am so profoundly sorry this happened to you. This is an outrage. CSM Thorne, groggy but lucid, looked up at her, his eyes clouded with pain and confusion. General Vance? Madam Secretary? But, why are you here? A flicker of the old bond, the deep respect between a commander and her most trusted senior NCO, passed between them. Because, Sergeant Major, she said, her voice hardening as she shot a glacial look towards the cluster of police officers, no one who has served this nation with your distinction, your sacrifice, your unyielding honor, should ever be treated this way. Not for exercising their fundamental rights. Not ever. She squeezed his hand gently. You're safe now. We'll take care of everything. Then, Secretary Vance rose to her full, imposing height and faced a now deeply apprehensive Captain Miller, who had tentatively approached. Captain Miller, her voice was quiet, almost dangerously so, yet it carried the unmistakable weight of four-star command. You and your officers have, by all appearances, tossed an unarmed, 75-year-old peaceful protester. A highly decorated combat veteran of the United States Army. You did so on public property, during what appears to be a lawfully permitted assembly. Before I make any further calls, I suggest you explain yourself. Clearly. And concisely. Miller, visibly sweating now, stammered about an unlawful assembly, repeated warnings to disperse, the need to maintain order, officer safety. Secretary Vance cut him off with a sharp, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Officer safety, Captain. From a 75-year-old man with a walker, holding a small flag. Your department's definition of a threat, and indeed its understanding of the First Amendment, appears to be catastrophically flawed. She paused, letting her words hang in the tense air. Furthermore, your officers appear to have engaged in a level of force entirely disproportionate to any perceived infraction. She then turned to Special Agent Coulson. Agent Coulson, please ensure all body-worn camera footage from every officer involved in this incident, as well as any city surveillance footage of this plaza for the past 2 hours, is secured and preserved. I want a full, unadulterated federal review initiated by my office, commencing immediately. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division will be formally notified within the hour. I expect full cooperation from local authorities." Coulson nodded, his expression grim. "Already being actioned, Madam Secretary." The surrounding police officers, including a ghastly pale Officer Peterson, who looked as if he might faint, finally understood. This wasn't just a local protest gone wrong. This wasn't just an IA investigation. This was federal. Cabinet level. And the woman standing before them, radiating cold fury and absolute authority, was not just a politician, she was one of their own, a soldier's soldier, and she was clearly prepared to bring the full weight of the U.S. government down on their heads for harming one of her veterans, and not just any veteran, but a man she clearly knew and deeply respected. The sight of the Secretary of Veterans Affairs, a former 4-star general, personally intervening on behalf of a tossed elderly black veteran, with Secret Service agents securing the scene, sent shockwaves far beyond City Hall Plaza. Within minutes, local news crews, alerted by calls from protesters and the unusual congregation of black SUVs, began to arrive, their cameras flashing. The narrative was explosive. Decorated war hero tossed by police at peaceful protest, VA Secretary, ex-general, arrives on scene. Captain Miller and Officer Peterson, along with several other officers involved in the direct confrontation, were immediately relieved of their weapons and badges by their own arriving superiors, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning terror. The message from on high, filtered down through the city's suddenly frantic chain of command, was clear: cooperate fully with the federal inquiry, no excuses, no stonewalling. The city was in full damage control mode. Secretary Vance accompanied CSM Thorne in the ambulance to New Liberty General Hospital, personally ensuring he received immediate and comprehensive medical attention. She stayed by his side, a reassuring presence, until Colonel Aaliyah Washington and members of Thorne's local VFW post, contacted by Vance's office, arrived. Thankfully, his injuries from the taser and the subsequent fall were not life-threatening, though he was badly bruised, shaken, and deeply distressed by the ordeal. The emotional shock, Vance knew, would be significant. All his medical expenses will be covered, of course, Secretary Vance assured Colonel Washington and Thorne's concerned friends. And I give you my personal word, as a soldier and as a secretary, that those responsible for this disgraceful mistreatment will be held fully accountable. This is not just an assault on Command Sergeant Major Thorne, it's an assault on the dignity of every man and woman who has ever worn the uniform of this country. Later that day, standing before a hastily assembled press conference outside the hospital, Secretary Vance's words were unequivocal. "Let me be perfectly clear," she stated, her voice resonating with controlled anger and unshakable resolve. "The right of our veterans to peacefully assemble, to petition their government, to speak truth to power, is sacrosanct. It is a right many of them, like Command Sergeant Major Thorne, fought and bled for on foreign battlefields. To see that right met with unprovoked violence and callous indifference on American soil is an abomination. My department, in full coordination with the Department of Justice, will conduct a swift, thorough, and transparent investigation. There will be accountability." The black SUVs and the quiet, watchful presence of federal agents remained a visible fixture in New Liberty for several days as the initial inquiry ramped up. The city's mayor and police chief, facing a national firestorm, issued public apologies and hastily announced reviews of their department's use of force policies and protest policing protocols, with specific attention to interactions with vulnerable populations and veterans. Captain Miller and Officer Peterson were formally suspended without pay, pending the outcome of the federal civil rights investigation, their careers in ruins. Other officers involved faced disciplinary action. CSM Thorne, recovering in the hospital, became an unintended symbol of resilience, of the ongoing fight for veterans' rights, and of the shocking disparities that can still exist in how citizens, especially elderly black citizens and veterans, are treated by those sworn to protect them. He never sought the spotlight, but his quiet courage in standing his ground, and the powerful, decisive response it triggered from the highest levels, sent a clear message across the nation: veterans are not to be trifled with, their rights are inviolable, and sometimes, the old bonds of military service and mentorship can move mountains, or at least, dispatch a fleet of black SUVs to ensure justice is served. The swift, decisive intervention on behalf of Command Sergeant Major Thorne echoed far beyond New Liberty. It served as a stark reminder: the oaths taken by those in uniform, to protect and defend, to uphold justice, carry an immense weight, a weight that demands respect from all quarters. When the rights of those who fought for everyone's freedom are assaulted, the response must be unwavering. What does true respect for our nation's heroes, particularly elderly black veterans, look like to you, both from institutions and individuals? Comment below with your thoughts and reflections. If you believe in protecting our protectors, like this story, share it to honor their service, and subscribe to your channel name for more narratives of courage and justice.